my presentation this morning is really around our story in Miramar. I've called it Rules of Engagement because that was a kind of a sexy title, but it's a bit of a story of how I think we have captured the community and got everyone so excited by this project. I think it's probably useful to, I guess, discuss just a bit about how I ended up in this role. I've always been into the outdoors. I was, a tramper as a teenager and loved being outside and enjoyed bird life and that sort of thing. So when we moved here to Miramar, our house is lucky enough to back onto a bush reserve. So we've had bush at our doorstep since moving here, and that's been wonderful. And I got involved with the local restoration group, Te Kākāriki Ecological Restoration, and started doing weeding and planting with Joachim Lehman, who runs that. And also, this was at a time when trapping groups were big. Later on, there were trapping groups around the city and beginning to set up. And so I wanted to leap in and set up a project locally and work in my own backyard before someone else did, really. So, we established the group in, it's 3 years ago now, in June 2017. And it was largely inspired by the work that Kelvin Hastie had done in Crofton Downs. Kelvin had a great lot of success over there, getting rid of the rats in that suburb. Predator Free Brooklyn had just started off, and I was at the time trapping with Pole Hill Protectors, who you may have heard of, right on the fringe of the CBD, and I had a trap line around there that I would check at lunchtimes from my office in town, which was really good. But yeah, it was the notion that this is something we could do in Miramar, is what propelled me to sort of set the group up. And early on, a good friend of mine, Dan Coop, one of my oldest friends, he lives just down the road from us in Miramar. And even early on, when we'd moved to Miramar, he and I had both talked about the island nature of the peninsula and that it would be great to see if you could actually get everyone trapping and eradicate the rats. So, but then we all got busy raising families and kind of forgot about it. So then it came back round through the community groups. But so we set the group up in June 2017, and we kind of had a bit of a soft opening with just a few early adopters, maybe 20 friends and family who had traps. This slide shows the first trap box that I built out of fence palings that had fallen off a fence in our backyard. And that's trap number one, Predator Free Miramar trap number one. It's still catching things in our backyard, although we haven't seen a rat for many months now. And at this stage that we set the group up, there were several other groups already working on the peninsula. So as I mentioned, Te Kākāriki Ecological Restoration is a group set up by Joachim Lehman, who's just a great local hero. And they do weeding, planting, and at this stage had a few traps in the reserves as well, maybe 20 odd. We had places for penguins. As it sounds, they have a focus on the penguin colonies that we have around the Miramar Peninsula in Wellington. If you don't know Miramar, it's about 1,000 hectares, give or take, and it's right on the southeast of Wellington, and it joins the airport. So it used to be an island. Te Kākāriki translates roughly as the precious island. So, so we have this wonderful sort of geographical advantage that there's a 20-kilometre coastline. So places for penguins, had a lot of trapping going on, but also building penguin homes, little boxes for them to take refuge in around the coast. And a few months before we set up, Predator Free Seatoon had established as well. Hamish and Deb set up a group over there, and there was a smaller group just to the south, Breaker Bay, Predator Free Breaker Bay, set up by Meg. So there was a bit of activity going on when we set up our group. There's a map of Miramar Peninsula. It offends me greatly that it's orientated the wrong way. It should be up and down the page. I'm a maps guy, and it really wants to have north at the top, but for the sake of fitting it on a landscape page, I had to rotate it. So if you're OCD like me, then I apologise. But that map shows the trap numbers that were out there. So that's a combined map of all the community groups. The little blue ones have a little penguin icon. You probably can't see that. The orange stars are all the Predator Free Miramar backyard traps at the time that I did this map. And the yellow stars were the Te Motukairangi trap net, which was about 100. So you can see the good coverage that we have as a group, basically. I'm just trying to see. Yeah, so collectively, there's probably, between those groups, I'm guessing about 1,800 traps. And just to give you a sense of what we've achieved so far, that's a snapshot of our catches as at last week. Nearly 11,000, predators caught. Yeah, more than 5,000 rats, 5,000 mice, 24 weasels, and nearly 300 hedgehogs. And the graph in the background, our records date back to March 2017. And the last month there is last month, April 2020. So there are three big peaks on that graph. The green line is rats, the yellow line is mice, and the little two blue lines down the bottom are hedgehogs and weasels. But yeah, those three big peaks are April, May. That's where we are right now. So that tallest peak is this time last year. And I think it was May, we recorded 542 rats caught off our, would have been 1,000 traps at that stage. We've now got 1,400 traps. And you can see April last month, I think the catch numbers, I can't recall the exact figure, but it's fewer than 100 rats caught last month, maybe 50 or 60. So we've had a massive impact, and that's exciting. So that's just a brief introduction of where we're at. But in terms of how we did it, and that's what I'm really here to talk to you about today, I had to do a presentation last year, and I thought, what should it be about? Oh, we want to talk about our story. And I was talking to Dan Coop, and I said, well, I was thinking top 10 things we did. And he stopped me before I'd finished the sentence and said, no, 10's too many. Do 7. I thought, okay, good. 7. And I thought, what's a good 7-letter word? So I have framed this presentation in the form of a crappy acrostic poem. Spelling out the word engaged. So I will just take you through it, really. These steps are not necessarily in order, but they're just a useful little way for me to shoehorn our story into something slightly memorable. E for engaged. E is egalitarian, and what we tried to do was to create a group where everybody's voices were equal and everyone got a chance to be heard. So our main mechanism for communicating with people is Facebook. It's just the simplest way for us to quickly get our stories out there in communication. But right at the beginning, I made a really concerted decision to make it a Facebook group, not a Facebook page. And just briefly, the chief difference between those two things are, as a page, you're really communicating from one to many, and it's not easy for the traffic to come back and everyone to see that. So if I was to be a Predator Free Miramar page, I would be posting as a slightly anonymous Predator Free Miramar avatar. And if anyone else wanted to post to that page, their photos, stories, comments would be sidelined off to one side and not very visible to everyone else. So a group means that you're communicating as yourself. So everything I post is as Dan Henry. And then other people, when they want to put their photos or comments up, they're commenting as themselves. But what that does is it means that everyone's voices get to be heard, and if people want to share their successes, then they're visible to everyone. And I think it's been a really effective advantage for us to sort of make it open and honest and allow everyone to have their voices heard. The pictures there, the picture on the left is our sort of official launch in August 2017. We had a little, at the community hall in Miramar, we had about 80 people, or 200 people through that day, and we gave away 80 traps on the first day. Picture on the right is Dave Shaw with the 1,000th rat caught. The other point, having said that everyone's voices are equal and everyone gets to be heard, I think the project also needs a face, and that face was me. And part of the trade-off of posting as oneself is that you're putting yourself out there and you're doing it under your own guise and you can't take it back. There's no hiding. And, I was uncertain whether we'd get a bit of flack from people for killing animals or whatever, but I just took the step and thought, look, I don't care. I'm fine. I'm going to do this. I'm putting my name on the door, and it's worked, I think. So that was egalitarian. I think that's what that word means, eh? N was nice and simple. I did say it was a crappy acrostic poem. Nice and simple, but it was our way of what we tried to do was to create systems to make it easier for ourselves. So early on, we set up catch report forms. It was a simple Google form that people could just hit the link, punch in what they'd caught, and it would come up on a database for us. We did the same for people who were wanting to register to get a trap. We had a sign-up form. We made a little website, which, every time we encountered a problem, we thought, is there an easy way to make this simpler for ourselves? So a lot of what we did early on was to give away traps at community fairs and those kinds of things, which is easy because you can demonstrate how to use the trap to somebody and then send them on their way. But if you didn't want to interact face-to-face with people all the time, how do you get around that fact of showing them how to use the trap? So we shot a couple of videos of how to set a trap and put those up on a simple Google website. So those were some of the systems we created. But as a counter to that, we also needed to make peace with not everyone would want to use those systems, and people always want to exist outside that. So allowing people to work outside those systems. In the photo on the right there, that's Daryl Wilson, who is one of our super success stories locally. James, in the first webinar, James Wilcox mentioned Daryl, and there is a doco online you can watch called Ratman, and that's Daryl proudly showing one of his rats that he caught. And Daryl is one of those people who existed outside of that system early on. So, we'd set up these forms and I'd want people to sort of punch you, tell us what you caught and put it on the form. And a lot of people would do that. But I still had people stopping me in the supermarket and saying, "Oh, Dan, I caught another rat last week. See you later." And I'd have to try and remember who that was and then go and find them on the database and find their trap number and record that. And other people would text me and others would Facebook message me and emails. But Daryl would kind of was a great example of that, in that he would Daryl's got about 12 of our traps and he rotates them around different houses in Strathmore. He's kind of subcontracted to his neighbourhood and is trapping with impunity over there. But Daryl wasn't great on reporting his catches to us, but every few weeks I'd get a text from an unknown number and it would be Daryl on a new phone saying, "Oh, I caught another rat," or whatever. And so we had the systems, but knowing that not everyone would operate through them and making peace with that and knowing that was fine was part of the adjustment for me. And the other part of the nice and simple thing is that we reinvested money to make the job easier. So early on, we got a grant from the Nico Foundation, which is a local charitable group in Wellington. And we got several $1,000s, which was fantastic. But we channeled that money back into ways that would make it easier for us to scale up and get bigger and be more efficient. So we bought a trestle table so that when we went to the school fairs, we were self-contained and we had somewhere to put our traps or, things like that. It's the simplest little thing. We got a flag made through warehouse stationery so that we didn't have to spray paint our sign on a bit of plywood and it looked a bit professional. Bought tools, materials, nails, screws, whatever. We bought a steel cutting guillotine, a hand shear it's actually called, but it's a big guillotine, and we use that for cutting the mesh to make the traps, and that just sped everything up and saved us from getting RSI. So any ways that we could to make it easier, we leapt at those. G is for gaps on a map. So what we did is early on we just gave away traps to whoever wanted them, and then we plotted those on the PFNZ map, and we looked to see where we had a lot of traps and where we didn't. And where we didn't have traps, we did little targeted mail drops. So we'd just print A5 flyers, maybe even just 200 at a time, and then we had Dan's wife Yolanda, as she was out walking the dog, she'd take some of these flyers and deliver them to a street where we didn't have good coverage and see whether that yielded anything. But we also looked at little pockets of bush. Looking at a map, you'd go, right, well, we haven't got many traps here, and there's this little chunk of road reserve there, and if I was a rat, that's where I'd live, but there's no traps there. What can we do about that? And we might find a neighbour who already had a trap nearby and say, hey, if we put these 2 traps in this little chunk of Cape Ivy or whatever, would you mind checking them? Yeah, love to. And so that way we kind of outsourced. We got those gaps covered, and we got someone taking ownership of it who was keen on it and got underway. So the picture here, the larger montage picture on this slide shows 10 rats caught. So this is from an area of bush on Wexford Street in Miramar, which is essentially, there's a big flat hilltop behind the Wellington sign. If you've ever flown into Wellington and you look out to the east, there's that windy Wellington sign, and there's a hill there with a whole bunch of gorse. And we looked and thought, well, there's no pest control there. What can we do? I wonder who owns it, we said. And we went up there and had a look, and there was an old Ministry of Transport sign with what looked like a bullet hole through it. And there was otherwise there was no signage there saying who owned it, and there hadn't been a Ministry of Transport with that decal since about 1989. So we figured it wasn't that well looked after, and what was the harm? So we went and did a bit of a guerrilla campaign. We chucked in 16 Victor traps in a big loop every 50 metres in April. And in the first month, we took out about 100 rats. And that montage in that picture there is 10 rats caught out of 16 traps, or 8 rats, 2 mice, and 3 traps triggered with evidence of a catch, but the carcass had been taken away. So, and that was just in one night. And so basically, this was a good example of what we thought we could do, be quite effective just by putting traps in untrapped areas and checking them regularly. So that first month of April last year, I probably checked those traps every day or every second day. I'd just go for a run in the morning and blast around them. And we took out so many rats because we didn't leave them for a month, which is kind of, I guess, best practice or whatever. You might do fortnightly checks, and we were keen to get the job done, but the fact that they were cleared every day meant that there were more trap nights available to catch more stuff, and we smashed that rat population really hard. So, G is for gaps. That's what we did there. A is for always posting. Again, not a great poem, but with Facebook, I would post 3 times a day sometimes if I had something to share. And I think this was a big part of how we got people paying attention and taking note, is that we engaged with every post. So if you had caught a rat and you posted it on the page, I would be one of the first to like it, and I would comment and say, well done, fantastic, set the trap again, see if you can get another one, kind of thing. And really just, and I meant it. I mean, it sounds like platitudes now, but, I was excited to see people taking ownership and getting excited by the project. So I was enthusiastic about my responses. And I think that enthusiasm feeds off itself and creates enthusiasm among others. So engaging with every post, and this is a big thing, I think, resisting the urge to be coy or sanitize it. So our Facebook feed early on, and still now and again, was filled with pictures of dead things. And I know that's not to everybody's taste. And we did get the odd comment with people saying, I can't cope with this. I don't want to see this. But my hunch, entirely unscientific, is that we got so many more wins by posting dead rats on that page than we did losses. So because humans are a competitive bunch, seeing that someone has had a success in their backyard and caught something, I think is going to propel others to do the same, and have a crack and see if they can outdo their neighbour or the person down the street. And there is a genuine kind of excitement in setting a trap and baiting it and wondering what will happen, and then the next morning turning up and finding something dead in it. That is, it's kind of caveman stuff, but it's people do feel a sense of satisfaction, I think, when that happens. So allowing people to celebrate that, I think, is hugely important, really. So the picture on the right there is Dean Ford and his family with one of their early catches, which looks like a very large ship rat, I think, possibly in Norway, but I think a ship rat. And it's because we're not the advantage of our group and all groups like ours is that we write our own rules and we're volunteers, and so essentially no one can tell you what to do, right? We're not DOC, we're not a government department or a rate paying organisation, so we can decide what to do. We're not a science journal, and so if people are offended by dead rats on the page, well, sorry, but it's working for us, so we're going to stick at it. That was kind of my attitude. And the neat thing is that it has been self-moderating. And so early on, as I say, there were a lot of dead things on the page. You can't see dead rats on our page now for all the birds that people are posting. And that's just been a natural progression and a natural shift. It's so much easier to post a picture of a dead thing because it's not going to run away than it is to take a cell phone photo of a tui on the wing. I would post bird photos early on if we had them, but they're much harder to get. But nowadays, we've got Keridu visiting and they sit on the wire and it's easy to get a shot. So that natural progression's been cool to see. The next G was get support. And this is a big one. As I say, this is not in order, this word engage, but this is something we did early on, was to get local business support. And the local thing's really important. We enlisted the help of our local cafes and garden centre and our local brewery. And then we supported those businesses in return and kind of trumpeted our gratitude loudly on our Facebook page and on our newsletters. The picture left to right, the picture there is of a story in the Dominion Post about us getting some peanut butter from Fix and Fog. We use a lot of peanut butter for our traps, and I thought, well, we've got our local Fix and Fog peanut butter manufacturer in town. I wonder if they've got any spare. And I wrote them a quick email and then followed up with a phone call. And long story short, 96 kilos of peanut butter was what they offered us, and these were seconds. If they get some peanuts in from overseas, whatever, and the bag is split in transit, that's no longer food grade. They can't sell it, but they still use it to check the grind or the roast in their machinery, and so then they've got peanut butter that they can't sell, but it's great for rats. So we got this peanut butter and distributed what we couldn't use to other groups around Wellington, and then we called on our friends at the Larder Cafe and had them set up as a bait depot. So we bagged all this peanut butter up into little bags, and they had it stashed behind the counter. And we encouraged people to go into the cafe, pick up your scone and your flat white and get some bait for your trap. And what that did was, it drove people to the cafe, but more importantly, it kind of normalised trapping, and it became something that you did. It's the most normal thing in the world to get bait for your rat trap while you're picking up your morning brioche, And that was really instrumental in sort of tipping it from some niche kind of grey-bearded, fleece-wearing, sandal-wearing, hippie kind of conservation thing into dinner party conversation. One of our boxes on our sign-up form is, how did you hear about us? And it was interesting early on just to see more and more people saying, at a dinner party. You know, literally I knew we'd succeeded when we'd tipped and become dinner party conversation. The second picture on that slide there is one of our trap giveaways at Palmer's Garden Centre. And so that was something we did. We were able to do a trap giveaway, but also give away a tray of plants as a swap prize or something from Palmer's, who were really generous like that. And that's 2 pints of the fantastic Predator Free stout or porter that we made last year with the boys at Double Vision Brewing, who have been hugely supportive to us too. But so we've done spot prizes through all the businesses that have supported us, and given prizes away, not for the person that catches the most rats, but trying to keep that equal footing thing. Anyone who reports a rat caught to us in the following 2 months goes in the draw to win something. And we tried to make sure that whether you were in a really ratty area and you'd caught 60 rats, or you were out on the flat with not a lot of bush habitat and you'd caught one mouse, you were still in with a chance to win. Get support. Yeah. So that helped keep the conversation going and create community and make it about more than just killing shit, really. E is for enthusiasm. So, yeah, that's my enthusiasm for the project. But more importantly, it's the enthusiasm demonstrated by our trappers. So the big lesson here for me was that it was important to concentrate on fostering the enthusiastic trappers and not to get bogged down with those who weren't trapping as hard as maybe they could be. So we ran some numbers early on in the project and realised that, and this is about roughly when we had 1,000 traps on the ground, so not that early on, but we hadn't heard from, we'd only heard catches reported from about 45% of people that we'd given out traps to. And that was slightly disheartening to realise that. But I think what's happening there is that people have taken a trap and they've taken it home and thought, oh, we'll just put that down there and we'll get onto that later. So either they got the trap and never set it, or they'd got the trap and they'd caught heaps but hadn't reported it, or they'd got the trap and caught nothing and got despondent and stopped, or some combination of all of that. But rather than get sort of uptight and try and harangue those people that weren't trapping, we thought, well, let's just focus on those who are. And we looked again at those numbers and realised that actually more than half of all the catches that we'd had reported to us had been caught by our top 10 trappers. So a few people can make a massive difference to the rat population. And so part of that focusing on fostering that enthusiasm was that if people were keen to do more, we would give them a trap line that they could own and run in one of our reserves or something. So we, as well as our backyards, we had traps in a few council reserves and some Crown land on the north end of the peninsula. And that meant that they had an outlet. They were excited by this project and they could, go and run around 30 traps in the weekend and get their fill on that sort of thing. But there were other ways that people could help the project. And so the picture on the left there is an artwork that was done for us by Laurie Davis, who's a local artist who was keen to do something for the project to get involved. So she did this amazing watercolour artwork for us. And we did and that became a flyer and some posters for cafes around the thing. And, that made a real difference. We had people on that "How did you hear about us?" thing saying, I saw the poster in the cafe. We gave some of those away as prizes. And the picture on the right is Fiona Austin and her daughter Chelsea making yet another TV appearance for us. So we did quite a bit of media as we've gone through for various different things. And I've shoulder tapped Fiona many times, and she's been such a trooper and turned up and done that to sort of talk about their experience. She runs 6 traps at her little block of on the neighbours at the top of her driveway there, and she's caught something like 300 rats in the last 18 months. So she's an amazing person to have on board. But the important thing is that however people wanted to be involved, whether it was artwork or running a 40-strong trap line in the bush or turning up and making a TV appearance, whatever it was, we were happy to have that work. Another on the figures in terms of that, the 45% uptake really or response. We also, as well as Facebook, I send out newsletters every couple of months because I know not everyone's on Facebook. And a couple of weeks ago, I sent out 1,000 newsletters to 1,000 people, and looking at the stats on MailChimp afterwards, we had something like 500 people open that newsletter, which is just an interesting kind of figure to me, in that there's 500 emails that have gone out and not been opened, which I think 500 clicks and opening is actually really good, and I am happy with that. It's good, but it is an interesting thing to be aware of, is that you're putting these comms out, and and the enthusiastic ones are hearing it and taking it and running with it, but there are plenty of people that you just simply won't reach, and you could lie awake at night worrying about that, or you could just move on. Another interesting point to make before I move on is just recently in the lockdown period, we were trying to enlist people's help when rats had been sighted running in the street or whatever, and trying to get that local area to step up and set their traps. So I started sending quite targeted emails to just those people in that area, to 10 or 12 people, and that had a really good uptake. So someone emailed us and said, I saw a rat running along Pata Street, just by the white concrete wall. So I jumped on the map and looked at all the trap numbers around that area and wrote them down, and then found email addresses for those 12 people that had those traps, and wrote to them and said, I'm writing to just 12 people here. A rat's been seen in your area. Could you dust your trap off, rebait it, reset it, and see if you could help us out? And I think a wise person I was speaking to the other day said it's kind of the bystander effect, that if that notion that if there's a crime happening and there's a million people watching it, no one wants to get involved because they're all expecting someone else will. But if people know that there's only 12 people on this list and it's a very direct approach for help, then people are more likely to maybe step up. And we saw that. I had at least half the people I wrote to wrote back and said traps all set and ready to go. We had another woman, one of those 12, wrote back and said, I've got arthritic hands and I find it really difficult to set my trap. Any chance I could get some help? So we enlisted a neighbour who lived next door to come into her property in a contactless fashion and set the trap, and caught 3 rats in 4 nights. So it works. And it's an interesting thing just about being targeted in your comms, really. I digress. D is for delivered. There are 2 pictures there. The one on the left is the delivery we took early on of 800 Victor traps from Key Industries in Auckland. I think we created a trap drought, actually. I think they were unavailable for a while because of that pallet load that we got delivered early on. But the point of this this delivered note, is that for the most part of the 1,400 traps that we've got out there on the ground, which represents probably 1,000 households, I've probably hand-delivered, I don't know, more than 600 or 700 of those. We gave some away at school fairs and at, garden centres and whatever. But for the most part, the workflow would be that people would get in touch on the catch report, on the sign-up form, and say, I'd like a trap. They'd get an email back saying, no problem, we'll get one to you as soon as we can. And I would have a stash of these in the boot of my car, and on the way home from work, I would go past their house, knock on the door and say, here's your trap, and give them a quick demo on how it works. And I think that paid huge dividends for us, because that sense that I had taken the time to come to them and explain how it worked and maybe show them a good spot to put it in, and had made a connection with those people, I think that really yielded good results, because it was meaningful. They knew who I was, and we had human beings, and they felt supported in their trapping mission. And, you know, that's slightly at odds with the earlier slide, nice and simple. There's nothing simple about hand delivering that many traps around the neighbourhood, but, you know, we were keen to see this work, and I think that had mitigated to some degree that sense of just throwing as many traps out there in an anonymous fashion and hoping that it was working. So that is my acrostic poem. It's not great. To wrap up, I just wanted to touch briefly on the eradication, the elephant in the room, the other elephant in the room, not my beard, but the fact that we haven't done this alone. Predator Free Wellington's Eradication has been running here since autumn last year. And so on top of the 1,800 odd community traps that we had on the peninsula, that, if you didn't see James's presentation, each one of those dots is a trap set by a trap or a bait station set by the Eradication team, which is massive. But the important thing really about how the two organisations work together is that this is about people, and without having a community that was hungry for this eradication to take place, it would have been so much more difficult for the eradication to get up and running and have the success that it has had. You know, because we had this community that felt ownership of this project, and they were, you know, really keen to see it succeed. You know, the eradication has gone a lot simpler because the community feels like it's part of them. And the blurring of the lines between Predator Free Wellington's eradication and Predator Free Miramar's community traps, I think many of the people in our community don't necessarily draw a distinction between the two. The whole kaupapa is just to sort of make this community a better place for the birds. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, these photos are all relatively recent. And have been posted to our Facebook page. So, you know, the top line, the piwaka waka, the tui and the keriru, they've been here for some time. But the three bottom photos, you know, the kaka on the bottom left and the kākāriki on the bottom right, both those pictures taken by Griffin Hunt, one of our keen trappers, and the kārere in the middle, you know, that's a red letter day when we saw kākāriki photographed in Miramar for the first time just 3-4 weeks ago. And that kaka, I'm pretty sure that's the first photograph of a kaka to be taken on the peninsula. So it just kind of goes to show that, you know, it does make a difference. And the fact that people are out there looking for those birds now and are tuned into it and are excited by it and excited enough to share it with the neighbourhood, and then start a conversation with all these comments saying, oh, wow, we haven't had keriru at our place yet, we're waiting for them to come down. You know, people are actually excited to see that happen. And the last slide in the presentation here is basically that I wrote all this stuff down, and you can read this massive long tome of all this verbiage right there. If you go to the resources page at Predator Free Wellington's website, you can click through and get that PDF and read it. It's good bedtime reading. It'll put you to sleep. There's that much detail in it. But the reason for writing that down was really that so I could remember what we'd done, but also so I didn't have to keep saying it over and over again to other people who asked. And I think it's important. You know, I think if we can share these stories and get other people tuned into the notion that it's actually about people and people's enthusiasm for this project, and the technical stuff will come. That's actually simple. But if we can turn people on to the fact this is something you can do, then, you know, a predator-free New Zealand by 2050 is 100% possible.
You're 100% volunteer. I don't think you made that clear at the start. You may have. Can you just reiterate that?
I can. I am. This is a 100% volunteer role. It's something that as I said, I set it up because it was, I felt selfish. I wanted to do it and control it in case someone else got in and did it first. But I do feel passionate about it. And yeah, it takes a lot of time. People have said, how much time do you think you'd spend on it? It's like, well, I don't know, because I'd be horrified probably to top that up. but a lot. But it's hugely fun. I'm lucky to have a job with flexibility where I do work from home and I work in evenings and things as required. But I have a lot of free rein and can fit it in and around. But yeah, it does take a lot of time, but it's hugely rewarding. And I probably couldn't stop it now if I tried, because of the success we've had. It's not owned by me. It's I just set it up and I'm, a very vocal supporter of it, but it's something that's owned by the community now. Yeah.
It's great. No order, just as they came in.
Sure.
Hopefully they're still relevant, because you probably went through a few of them along the way. Any evidence of feral cats on Miramar, and if so, have they been targeted?
Yes, there is evidence. No, they haven't been targeted. There are a couple of pockets that I understand of. Well, there's a bit of a failed experiment with a sort of a managed stray colony. That was a thing. A colony of stray cats in the south of Miramar that was being kind of fed and cared for to some degree by locals, but there was a bit of a trap neuter release thing running there for a bit, which I think we've probably agreed was not great. And there have been ferals at the north end of Miramar. So there's bush reserves at the north and south of the peninsula. Obviously, regional council have the mandate to deal with cats as a pest animal and could be brought in as required to deal with that. But dealing with cats was, because we started in the backyards, cats were not on the radar, because it's just too difficult too early on until we've actually got the conversation underway. So we didn't pursue that immediately. I know there was the odd one taken off at the north end of the peninsula, when they were spotted, and that was dealt with through the regional council. But yeah, we haven't muddied the waters with that one yet.
A lot of people asked about your stencil, who made it. I think we said it in the chat box, but really important to have your own identity, stencil, etc.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's just fun, I think. Yeah. So I designed the little logo thing, and it was a very solid homage rip-off of, if you like, of the Te Kākāriki logo, because we kind of worked together in tandem. So the outline of the Miramar Peninsula with a gecko in the middle. I just roughed that up on a Photoshop type thing, but it was made by Grayley Plastics in Petone. Shout out to Brian, he's an essential business, and he just did them for free, laser cut them for free, and it's really good. I think the identity thing is good. It's part of what makes it fun, is to kind of brand the group and kind of work closely with all your neighbouring groups, but you've all got your own thing going on, because everyone can write their own rules and does it differently. And having it on the top of the box when your giant monster rat photo goes viral around the world, so does your stencil.
Paul just asked, you mentioned numbering traps. What advantage did that give you, is what he asks.
It's a good question. Numbering traps was just part of that nice and simple slide. Having a system, having an easy way to identify where that trap is and where it's gone to is, I think, just really important. And if that trap moves, then you can relocate it easily somewhere else. When you've got the Trap NZ project where you've GPSed everything online, it's much easier to have a 4-digit number than a name or a street address or a person or some long alphanumeric code. It's our trap numbers were cut up ice cream containers from the Much More brand, because they're gold and you can write on them with a paint marker and you can see it. So there's a little tip for you. That's in the PDF.
Here's one from Kate, just says, would you be happy to share your health and safety document?
Sure. There isn't one. Are you part of the feds, Kate? Don't be a dick that's the health and safety document. Be smart. Sorry, I shouldn't be so glib. There's no document. We don't keep minutes. That is the one document that I've written, and there might be some health and safety stuff in there. I don't think so, though. Email me.
Good. Well, that's answering the question. You did fine. Here's one I think you covered, but how did you work with the existing predator-free groups that were active on the pin in separate groups, or have you combined into one big beast? I think you covered it off as a group, but can you just specify?
Sure. No, it's a really good question. I didn't cover all of it. So as we started, there were many different groups, and over time we merged with the Predator-free Seatoon and Predator-free Breaker Bay groups, and combined into one big Predator-free Miramar group. It just made sense. So we absorbed, so the Seatoon traps, we brought them into the system so that anyone in Seatoon that wanted a new trap would come through us, and rather than having an arbitrary kind of division across the Seatoon Heights Road map line, it just seemed to make sense that we all work together. There is still the Places for Penguins group, and the Te Motu Kārangi group still exists, but essentially most of the trapping is done through us. And it just makes sense in terms of branding, really, that people know where to come to if they want to trap. Yeah. It was all very amicable.
Yeah, that's good. No stoats, all weasels, I've seen them in the chat box. So you never caught any stoats?
No stoats that I know of. We've caught 24 weasels in our backyard traps, and they were almost entirely caught on Victors with peanut butter. Yeah, and that works. Some of our traps, most of our traps are Victor Pro, just your simple with the yellow treadle, and maybe 200 of them are modified Victors with the shroud, which enable those traps to humanely kill a stoat, but we haven't seen any stoats that I know of on the peninsula. Yeah.
Somebody I saw asked about the shrouds on the Victors, and they said they have more catches on the non-shrouded versions. What's your take on that?
I haven't done any kind of numbers on it. Again, no science involved in this, but both traps are good. I think the ease of using the Victor Pro was appealing to us because actually it was the cost, to be honest. A shrouded Victor, the modified Victor, it's something like $9 per unit. I think $4 trap plus a $6. That's $10, isn't it? Plus a $6 shroud or whatever. It's getting up there. Whereas the Victor traps are under $4 for just the basic traps, so we could just get out and get it done. And they were NAWAC approved, and they got the job done. The modified ones are still a really good trap, but it's the bait on the bait block for the modified Victor is a little more fiddly and requires a bit more of a pulling motion than just a sort of standing on the treadle. So when we had a massive peanut butter, the Victor Pros were more appealing. Yeah.
While on traps, Lynn from Predator Free New Zealand asks, do you have any TRex traps out in the community?
No. Or there might be the odd one. I mean, but if it is, people have supplied it themselves. So we've given everyone our whole, I didn't mention this either, did I? Our whole kaupapa has been free traps for people. So all the boxes and the trap have just been given to people. I guess maybe you could argue that creates a sense of obligation, that the people feel they've got it for free, so they will make it work. Whereas perhaps if they paid for it, they might feel like they paid for it, it's theirs, and if they want to stop, they'll stop. I don't know, that's untested. But the point there is that some people have augmented that with their own traps that they've bought at the hardware store or wherever, and are running, those little better mouse traps with the spring. Some people are catching stuff on there. We don't care how it turns up dead. If the cat brought it in and someone emails us and says our cat caught a rat, then we'll still log that against their trap number, because it's still something that turned up dead on the property that correlates to that trap number that we gave them. So, yeah. We do have the odd snappy traps a few of those went out. In fact, I think a lot of the Seatoon traps early on were the snappies, but so there is a mixture of gear out there, yeah.
And Alice has asked if you tried Good Nature A24s. You got a few of those in amongst the community?
We do. A lot of people have, well, a lot. We've got quite a few people who have their own A24s on their property. We also have several A24s out in some of the bush reserves, particularly in the harder to get to spots, or if we've got a trap line, a nice sensible route that kind of follows a spur around a thing and then leaves a big gap in the middle. Sometimes we've put A24s in the middle so that they're kind of taking care of that area so the foot traffic, the regular visits around a trap line, and then some gullies that do their own thing for a bit, longer times between visits to the A24s.
Pam's asked, what's your annual budget and where does your money come from?
Right. Well, as I say, we, much like we don't keep minutes or have a health and safety document, we don't have a budget per se either. But we did get a good, healthy grant from the Nico Foundation early on. And we just used that money. In TV, you say put the money on screen. And what we did in our example here is that we put the money on the ground. So anything we could do to make our traps catch more stuff or get more traps out there, that's where the money went. Spray paint, nails, mesh, the flag, the table, tools, all sorts of things. That's... I don't know, I could go back and find out, but you can do a lot with a little. And we also, we got that grant from Nico Foundation. We also got money from the local Z petrol station. They were the first people to give us money. I wrote to them on a Sunday night and I had $600 in the bank account by lunchtime Monday. They said, love what you're doing, great idea, here's some money to get you started. And it was that kind of willingness to get behind it and see the worthwhile nature of the project that was really good. Yeah.
How any tips on being a leader, your style of leadership? Just, it seems very inclusive.
Gosh. Look, it's I think honesty, really, I suppose. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, this is a people business. Like, it is you have to enjoy it, right? Like, I've used a lot of, I mean, it's essentially, this is a project that I started, but I couldn't do it without Dan Coop, who's my kind of silent partner in this. And I jokingly call him my chief counsel, because whenever I've got a problem that we can't resolve, I'll go and talk to him about it and see if he can kind of strategize a way around it. But, we do it because it's fun, and because and I'm the public face of it because I probably like people and I quite like talking to people, and I've really enjoyed meeting all the people that I've met over this, and I've met some hugely great people, not just the people in our community, but my counterparts in the community groups, in the other groups around Wellington and around New Zealand. We're in touch with groups from Rakiura in the South, Stewart Island to the far north, and sharing ideas online and kind of emailing and talking and supporting each other's groups and cheerleading and that sort of thing. But, a leadership style, I don't know, is kind of, as I say, my name's on the door. I've put myself out there and said, this is something that I believe in, and people have responded in kind, and it, you can't hide from that when you're doing it under your own name. That's who you are, and not being afraid of that, I guess, not trying to hide behind a kind of, I think if you make it too official and too kind of regimented and too much of a committee and kind of that sort of thing, and then it gets a bit lost and it feels like a big thing. But I think my kids sort of recoil in horror because Dad's the rat man, but, it's kind of, it's been a heck of a lot of fun over the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our guys just put, we do it because it's fun, best quote ever. And I think that's perfect time to wrap up the webinar. Thanks so much, Dan. It's amazing your tireless effort as a volunteer and lead all these people or work with these people in your community. You're getting great results. Just a reminder to everyone that this has been recorded, and we will post this on the Predator Free New Zealand Trust website with a link through to this YouTube video. Good luck. Keep us informed. And just how do we contact you again? What's the best way to talk to you after this?
Well, you can email predatorfreemiramar@gmail.com, or on the Facebook group if you're not. I mean, it's an open group. You've got a request to join, but no one gets turned down unless you're a nutcase. But yeah, jump online, jump on Facebook, play along, share your posts. You don't have to be in Miramar to be in the group. We love seeing what other people are up to around the country. You know, yeah, just on there, I do this because it's fun and it's exciting, and it's a really nice foil to paid work, and you know, it's volunteer, but it's actually what gets me out of the bed in the morning. You know, it's exercise out in the bush. It's really good for your mental health. People are great. Made a lot of friends. So thanks for having us, Nick and Bex.